Thank you guys for coming today. And thank you to Diane and the Worcester Regional Transit Authority for hosting us in their beautiful hub. I'm Alex Cox from the MassDOT Transit Unit. I'm joined today by my colleagues Trevor Baird-Murray and Greg Saczynski, also from MassDOT. And this is the application training for the 2020 round of the Community Transit Grant Program. What we're going to do today is I'm going to give a quick introduction to the program, talk about the available funds this year, eligible applicants and activities, the dates and the evaluation process, talk about some successful projects that have been funded in the past. Then I'm going to turn it over to Trevor, and he's going to talk to you about the compliance that we do for successful awardees. Greg is going to talk about the civil rights requirements that come with being a recipient of federal funds. Then we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to look through this year's application and kind of do a deep dive and be able to answer any questions that you have about it. Just for a quick introduction into, if you're not familiar with the Community Transit Grant Program, this is MassDOT's combined annual competitive application for funds that benefit the transportation needs of seniors and people with disabilities. There are two different funding programs that are distributed through the Community Transit Grant Program. One of them is the federal Section 5310 program. This is the federal funds that are distributed to MassDOT each year, and then we run this process to distribute them to eligible organizations in Massachusetts. These funds can be used for capital equipment, which most often is fully accessible vehicles, but they can also be used for mobility management activities and to fund transportation operations, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about what those can be. But for the federal funds, capital and mobility management projects, the federal funds can cover 80% of the project costs, and then you would have to provide a 20% match to match those funds. And if you're applying for an operating project, the funding split is 50-50. So the federal funds are one of the types of funds that we distribute, and the other is the Mobility Assistance Program, which is a state funding source. We're very lucky in Massachusetts to have about $4 million every year that is distributed to us by the legislature to augment the federal funds. In a lot of other states, they only have the federal to distribute, but the MAP really helps us be able to give out a lot more money each year than we would otherwise. And MAP funds are only used for the purchase of fully accessible vehicles. They can't be used for operating or mobility management. And again, vehicles are matched in the 80-20 split. So this year, again, about $4 million will be available from the state MAP funds, and those can be distributed anywhere across the Commonwealth. The federal funds, as I said, are broken out by urbanized area, which is a federal definition based on the 2010 census, and they're apportioned to each urbanized area based on population. So the Boston area gets the lion's share. You can see the Worcester UZA gets 380,000, and so the total amount of federal funds available this year is going to be about $5.5 million, augmented with those $4 million of state funds. Just to talk about the eligible activities and projects that are available that can be funded with 5310, the largest one each year is usually vehicles, which can either be vehicles that are replacing ones that you already operate, or if you want to expand the size of your vehicle fleet, you can apply for new vehicles. And of course, all the vehicles that we offer are fully accessible, either equipped with wheelchair ramps or lifts. The second type of eligible project is a mobility management project. And this one is kind of a larger umbrella. It covers a lot of different types of activities that are they're all very different, but they fall under the mobility management umbrella, and they can include paying for salaries to hire a travel trainer who can work with seniors and people with disabilities in your area to help them become comfortable using traditional fixed route transit. It can be used for planning a new operation or service, and it can also be used for technology. So like if you want to buy some software to upgrade your dispatching center. There's a lot of different things that can fall under mobility management, and that's usually where kind of the innovative projects fall under. And the third type of eligible project is a traditional operating project. It just has to be a transportation operation that's targeted towards meeting the transportation needs of seniors and people with disabilities. But the services can also be used by the general public as long as they're not taking the seat away from the target population. It must address one of these three purposes to be eligible for 5310. It has to exceed the minimum requirements of the ADA. So for the RTAs in the room, that just means that it has to be serving a population beyond just the ADA required 3/4 of a mile from a fixed route paratransit service that you provide. It has to improve access to fixed route transit service and decrease reliance by individuals with disabilities on that ADA complementary paratransit. Or it has to provide alternatives to public transportation, including supporting voucher or volunteer driver programs. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those types of projects later. Something really important for the vehicles that are available through this program, if they're funded with federal funds, they have to be used for, they can't be used for certain types of trips. So one of them is that the vehicles funded with 5310 cannot be used primarily for the delivery of meals to persons in their homes. You can coordinate and assist with providing meal delivery service using the vehicle in the off hours as long as it doesn't conflict with providing public transportation service, but it just can't be the primary use of the vehicle. It's also not intended to provide emergency medical transport or ambulance service. Obviously, non-emergency medical transport is an eligible use, getting people to hospital visits and things, but it can't provide emergency medical transport on a regular basis. And it can also not engage in regularly scheduled school bus service. It has to be targeted towards the target population. Eligible applicants to this program include private nonprofit organizations, government authorities including city, county, town, or tribal governments, regional transit authorities or councils on aging, which I think covers 90% of the people in this room. And also, this is new in recent years, private taxi operators who want to apply for vehicles to augment their fleet with fully accessible vans are also eligible to apply for this program. The program dates for this year, the application period will be opening on May 28th, which is next Tuesday, I believe, the day after Memorial Day. Then that application will be open for 4 weeks, and it will close at 5 p.m. on June 25th. So you'll have about the month of June to work on your application and submit it. Then we'll spend the summer going through the applications and making, award recommendations. And we'll be targeting the first week of October to send out the notification of awards. We'll be adding the projects to the Regional Transportation Improvement Program lists in November to get the federal funds that we'll be awarding. And then the one-year contract is issued. It depends on what type of project and whether it's a new or existing project. If it's a new operating or mobility management contract, it'll have a target start date of January 2020. So because these are one-year contracts, that would mean that it would be for the calendar year of 2020 from January 1st to December 31st. If you are applying to continue an existing operating or mobility management program, the contract start date will be at the end of the current contract, so there's no gap in funding. Again, these are one-year contracts only. If you have started a new program and you want to come in for funding next year, you do have to fill out a new application each year. If the project is successful and you have metrics and things and you've already filled out the application once, it's a lot easier to do the next year. If you're applying for vehicles, they'll be delivered about a year from now in May to June 2020. The way that the applications are evaluated, the first thing is that we have to go through the project threshold criteria. We have to make sure that the application has been completely filled out, that the project and your organization meet all the basic eligibility requirements. And then we evaluate each project individually. For the vehicles, we're mostly looking at the age and mileage of the vehicles that you're applying to replace. Those are done just within MassDOT. And then the operating and mobility management projects are reviewed by an external committee, which includes staff from the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, just sort of a board of experts that evaluates each project on a case-by-case basis and makes recommendations for whether they think it should be funded or not. And then, of course, we only have a limited amount of funding available each year, so we have to take that into account alongside the review committee recommendations and how much funding is available both within your urbanized area and also whether you're applying for federal or state funds. The 60% of the score that will be given to each application is specific to what type of project you're applying for. If you're applying for replacement vehicles, it's based pretty much exclusively on the age and mileage of the vehicles you're applying to replace and how much funding we have available to how many vehicles we can replace with the amount of funds that we have each year. If you're applying for new capital, so expansion vehicles, you're gonna, in your application, outline the service needs, like why you need to expand your fleet size, and so we'll be taking a look at those as well as your existing fleet capacity and how sustainable it is to add new vehicles to your fleet. And then for mobility management and operating projects, those, as I mentioned, are just evaluated on a case-by-case basis, looking at each project's effectiveness and performance and how accurate the budget looks and how financially sustainable the project is. The other 20% of the score will be based on the coordination and collaboration that you can demonstrate with your project, whether you are working with other agencies in your area and sharing resources, being in touch with your regional coordinating council, planning organization, things like that. And then the last 20% is by demonstrating the unmet need that your project will be meeting and showing the project benefit, showing how many trips you plan to provide, what type of trip, what client base, and the target number of individuals that you'll be serving. If you're a returning applicant, MassDOT will not only be considering the information submitted in your application, but also how you've done with the funds in previous years, how good your reporting was to MassDOT, things like that. Just be sure, of course, to structure your application carefully to specifically address the questions you're being asked, and be sure to plan properly at the organization level and work on your application leave plenty of time before the deadline to get all the questions that we're asking answered. Really quick, we're just going to run through some successful projects that have been funded in the past. One of them was right here in Worcester County. There was an unmet need of seniors in rural southwestern Worcester County needing transportation to work. So SCM Elder Bus applied for operating funds to operate a fully accessible shuttle to serve those communities, and the grant they applied for was to fund that operation. They partnered with the Worcester Regional Transit Authority to provide the vehicle and support with managing the grant. And so that was funded with $45,000 of federal Section 5310, and then the other 50% of the project costs matched with WRTA operating money, as well as local funds. For an example of a volunteer driver transportation program, you can look to the Old Colony Planning Council in the Brockton area. The seniors in that area were facing a similar situation of decreasing mobility and the inability to continue driving alone. So the solution was to hire volunteer drivers to transport elderly individuals using their own personal vehicles, and the funds that they applied for through 5310 were used to reimburse the drivers for their gas mileage. And that was about $30,000 of Section 5310 funds matched with 50% funds from Old Colony. And for a travel training project, this would be one of the project types covered under mobility management. Seniors and individuals with disabilities in the Berkshire Regional Transit Authority's service area weren't comfortable using fixed-route transit, so BRTA hired a part-time travel trainer to help those individuals become familiar with their system, and the grant covered that individual's salaries as well as training materials like maps and things to hand out to help them become familiar with their system. And that was supported with about $20,000 of federal funds, which, because this is mobility management, that covered 80% of the project costs, and then BRTA covered the other 20%. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Trevor to talk about compliance.
So good afternoon, everybody. Trevor Barrett-Murray, I'm the Transit Compliance Officer at MassDOT around the Transit Division. I am going to give you a thumbnail sketch of the work that I do and what you can expect if you are successful in your application. It's a thumbnail sketch. It's not going to be an in-depth analysis of federal compliance issues. We will get into a lot more detail post-award for the successful candidates, and then we can discuss the actual implications. The purpose today, though, as I said, is to provide a thumbnail sketch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the compliance review process, what it looks like, how long it takes, and then I'm going to spend a little bit of time focusing on the three areas that we principally focus in on as part of our compliance review. First thing, we are the state administrative agency, so we're the folks that the feds give money to, and it is the requirements that I'm referencing here are all federal requirements. They're not optional, they're not at our discretion to enforce, these are musts. And we're basing these musts on reviews that are being conducted around the country and what the FTA are advising us of what the issues are that they're encountering as part of their national review. So again, these are not state requirements, these are federal requirements. Obviously there's going to be some significant federal regulations, and I need for you folks to be aware of what these regulations are. But again, I'm going to get into that in a lot more detail post-award. I don't want to discourage you folks from applying, but I just want to make you aware of what you're responsible for. So the compliance side visit is approximately it's a half day. We've conducted about 75% of all our compliance visits to date. We've come across a number of issues that are consistent across the board, across the state. I'm going to talk a little bit about those in a split second. All of this compliance review is conducted online. It's a paper-free process. It's a paper-free process. What we do is we give you the actual questionnaire that we base our review on about 6 weeks before the actual compliance review. We ask for you to fill out, respond to it, submit it to us online, and then we review it, conduct a desk review, and based on that desk review and based on your responses, then we come out and conduct a site visit. A lot of folks, we conduct a site visit of once and once only. The reviews are very successful. So we don't generally have to go out a second time or a third time. For those reviews that there have been issues, generally we'll conduct a second site visit within a 3-year period. But again, most of the time we are happy to report that desk reviews, at least the second go around, are successful. So I think I went over the site visits. Once, of course, we get the questionnaire out, completed, and in, we conduct the site visit. We then give you an opportunity to comment on the draft questionnaire. Once we receive your comments back, then we process it and issue recommendations or findings. Findings are musts. These are areas that we want to see fixed, that need to be fixed, and we'll give you a specific time frame within which to fix it. Recommendations are sort of the technical assistance part of what we do. This is what we've seen other subrecipients do in similar situations. You might find this document or this approach more helpful. And then, of course, we do a review, a follow-up, and close out. So there's 3 principal areas that I want to speak about a little bit today in the compliance area. And again, these are all FDA requirements. These are all areas that the FDA, when they come in to take a look at MassDOT, these are all the areas that they're looking at to see if MassDOT conducts reviews of. First is administration and management, second is operations and service, and the third is planning and marketing. The third category is principally composed of civil rights issues, which we do reviews of. But I've got a colleague here from the Office of Diversity and Civil Rights, and he's going to speak in a lot more detail. Not as accurately, but a lot more detail about civil rights as I am. Okay, so administration management, the first category, we look at project management, grant administration, financial management, procurement, and DBE, the EO. The DBE, as you know, is the civil rights. The EO is the civil rights issue. But taking it from the top, project management, we take a look at your past performance. How is the grant being administered? Do you have adequate staff? For grant administration, we're going to take a look at, for those of you who are applying for operating funds, what do your reimbursement requests look like? What do your invoices look like? Are we getting the responses that we need? For the fourth area, which is procurement, that applies to organizations that are going to take federal funding and use it to procure goods or services. So for those organizations here who are just going to apply to MassDOT for a vehicle, this category will not apply to you. But for those organizations that are going to use these federal funds to purchase a service, procurement will apply. The procurement requirements are probably one of the most fraught with FDA findings of all the categories that we review. Essentially, if you're using federal funds, talk to me before you do any sort of procurement. These are federal funds, so they have to be open and competitive, and they also have to be non-geographic specific. You cannot request to pay for a service using federal funds for only a Massachusetts or a New England-based organization. You've got to extend it nationally. So that's procurement. Again, DBE we'll talk about a little bit later. The second is the operations and service. Asset management is the number one issue. We'll spend a minute or two talking about it. Every time I go out, and I've been all over the state. I've been to all of the islands, Western Mass, Central Mass, Southern Mass. Consistently, I'm getting feedback that organizations are adequately maintaining their assets, their vehicles. The answer generally is that is not the case, or very often it's the case that they're not able to demonstrate to us that they are. A lot of federal funds on the street with a lot of billions and billions and billions of dollars in vehicles out there. So the feds understandably are requesting that the assets are maintained. They're not just being used, they're being maintained. The issue that we're finding consistently as part of our compliance reviews is that organizations are not able to demonstrate to us that they are maintaining these vehicles at the manufacturer's maintenance schedule requirements. And if they are, someone within the community, someone within the organization is not able to document that maintenance is being Another example of a maintenance issue is a pre-route checklist. You know, you conduct a checklist before the vehicle goes on the road. You uncover an issue with a windshield wiper, with a bulb, with a tire. We need to be able to follow that paperwork, that you identified a safety issue, that someone in the organization is responsible for correcting it, that someone corrected it, and here's proof that it's been corrected. So that's the sort of level of detail that we're looking for out of the road. I go out with a calculator and I go out with a ruler, and it's not pretty. I take a look at the oil change intervals from all vehicles as part of this. It's what the FTA will do to MassDOT. Again, the expectation is that we will perform the same due diligence on our part. Another asset maintenance issue is ADA related. All the vehicles that we're providing will have lifts. We want to make sure that these lifts are being maintained, that they're being used, that they're being cycled daily. We don't want an instance where a lift is not operating in the middle of February in some street that leaves an individual at risk. So that's something that's we look at. That generally is not an issue. We've found folks to be very responsive to that. So that's the operations and service. The last is planning and marketing. It's Title 6 and the public accommodations law. Greg is going to go into that a little bit. The FTA is putting a tremendous emphasis on Title 6. And again, Greg is going to go into it, so I don't want you to brush it off when he speaks about it. It's something they're looking at. They're looking for documentation. They're looking to make sure that these services are being provided to folks who traditionally may not be served by these services. So that's my part, but I wanted to not discourage you. Again, I want to encourage you to apply. The work you do is underappreciated. It's extremely valuable. I've been out to communities in Western Mass where there's no transportation options for folks who have worked all their lives and they're by themselves, and there's no medical appointments, no access to social services, and without the work that you folks do, they would be significantly challenged. So I want to bear that in mind. Again, encourage you, not discourage you. Again, there's no need to do it right now, but we've got a program guide. So as part of your review, you'll get a copy of this. Copy is actually available online. This goes over in detail what it is we're expecting from organizations. There are templates in there on asset management. There are templates in there on driver training, which is something we'll also look at. How to monitor it, how to track it, what are the required trainings. So 3 years ago when this program first started, a lot of this were shots in the dark. But we put together some light and some words and hopefully some technical assistance that you'll find helpful. So that's the first thing. It's the program guide. It's going to be sort of the Bible for this project. The other thing we have also online is a whole bunch of other resources that are available to sub recipients as they start this program. And I'm just going to list a few of them. We have procurement model policies for those organizations, again, who are going to take federal funds and use it to purchase goods or services rather than a vehicle. We've got a model procurement policy out there that the FTA has blessed, that you can plug in your organization's name and use as a tool. We have vehicle maintenance tracking records. So you plug in a vehicle by VIN, by mileage, and follow the requirements in that document, and you're able to demonstrate to us that you are maintaining the vehicle adequately. We have mentioned the program guide. We've also got our questionnaire, the document that we use as the basis for our compliance site visits. So all the questions that we're going to be asking you are available now. You can take a look at them. It's a 60, 70-page document, and so there shouldn't be any surprises. So that document is also available. But again, it's premature in this process to go online and take a look at all this information, but just know that it's there. This is not something we want to surprise you with. But I want to go back for just a second to the asset maintenance issue. Often, especially with councils on aging that operate within towns, what I've discovered is that there is a disconnect between the council itself and the maintenance facility. The council
Maintenance what?
facility, the maintenance organization. Very often the council believes that the vehicles be maintained because they're told so by the maintenance department, and very often the maintenance department is not doing what they need to do, or they're not documenting it. Some organizations have found it helpful to ask me to step in to have a chat with the town board or the folks at the maintenance facility itself. Just leave here knowing that it's been an issue. It's something we have issued findings on. We want to make sure that the maintenance folks are sort of part of this process and know what's coming. That there are going to be requirements, federal requirements for the maintenance. So Greg from Civil Rights is up, and he's going to talk more about civil rights.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Sobczynski. I'm MassDOT's Title VI Specialist in the Office of Diversity and Civil Rights. As my colleagues have already mentioned, this session, this training, is really meant to be kind of a primer on some of the overarching issues that we encounter with the administration of this grant program. With the civil rights requirements that I'll be touching on today, I'll try and keep it, same approach. Just kind of a primer. I want to introduce some of the concepts and topics and principles to you, so that you have a sense of kind of what you're getting into. Certainly not to discourage any of you from participating in terms of needing to deal with these requirements. But to make you all a little bit more comfortable with the concepts and understanding how to deal with them. So there's certainly going to be many more opportunities to take a much deeper dive on these concepts if needed, when needed, and I'll be giving you some resources along the way, contact information along the way, should you have any kind of detailed questions as we go. So you'll have many more bites at the apple, as it were. So don't feel like if there's any confusion when you're leaving the room today that's a showstopper. It's not, but we'll certainly work with you to address any of those issues. So what I want you to keep in mind as we start talking about the civil rights area in this grant program is what the objective that we're trying to achieve here, the mission that we're talking about. We're talking about public service. We're talking about public transit. We're talking about public transportation. So the kind of civil rights mindset that I want all of you to maintain when you're thinking about these operations is, are we providing these services in an equitable manner? Or are there areas of risk where individuals could be discriminated against in terms of accessing these services or benefiting from these services because of some kind of legally protected characteristic, because of their race, or their English proficiency, or their gender, or their age, or what have you. So that's the kind of highest level perspective that we're trying to maintain with all of this. And it's important to keep in mind that even when we're talking about something like the method of administration around scheduling, that sounds like a very kind of nuts and bolts, non-discrimination related issue, but there's civil rights implications in those activities. And that's kind of what I want you to keep thinking back to, is in the course of applying for these funds and administering these funds, should you receive them, or the vehicles, should you receive them, are there civil rights implications that you either can identify yourselves, or you'd like MassDOT to help you work through as you identify them. So I'm going to be talking about essentially 4 distinct, what I'll call program areas. 2 of them I'll touch on very briefly because they probably won't apply to the vast majority of you in the room. 2 of them I'll take a little bit of a deeper dive on. And I'll try to keep contextualizing the program area that we're living within for that given topic, just to kind of keep the big picture in mind. So first area, DBE, disadvantaged business enterprise requirements. So what we're talking about here is non-discrimination in your contracting activities. Basically, it's a proactive measure to ensure that DBE certified firms have an opportunity to compete for the contracts that you're letting in a non-discriminatory way, right? So the reason I say that this probably won't apply to most of you is most of you are here looking for vehicles. We, MassDOT, are procuring the vehicles for you, so the procurement is being done by us, and we are meeting these DBE requirements. When we're doing the procurement, you just need to operate the vehicle, so you can rest assured that these requirements have been met in advance. But as Trevor mentioned, if any of you are using these funds for a procurement of goods or services other than a vehicle, this could become a factor that you'll need to address. It's a simple process. You'll be expected to identify your contracting and subcontracting opportunities so that we can get a sense of whether or not there's even DBE certified firms that can or would be interested in competing for those contracts. When the contracts are actually put out, you'll be maintaining bidders lists to identify whether or not DBE firms are actually bidding and what kind of good faith efforts you've taken to solicit bids from those firms, those certified firms. And you'll be reporting these activities back to us in a very kind of routine, predictable manner. So it lets us report, again, back to our federal partners that this has been done in accordance with the federal regulations. Probably won't apply to you, so I won't go into more detail than that. The next program area that probably won't apply to you, so I'll keep it brief, is EEO, Equal Employment Opportunity. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as Title VII. The reason I say this probably won't apply to most of you, what we're talking about here, let me go back to the kind of umbrella. What we're talking about here is non-discrimination in your employment activities. So not non-discrimination in contracting, but non-discrimination in employment. Kind of your internal operation with your employees, so hiring, firing, promotional activities, and the way that the workplace is run. So there are, the way that the federal law is set up in this area, there are thresholds around the size of your staff and the dollar amount of federal dollars that you're receiving that dictate whether or not these obligations kick in to the extent that you actually have to develop and maintain an EEO program. The big one, I think, for most folks in the room is this 50 or more full-time transit-related employees. I have a feeling that all the operations in the room don't meet that level. If you do, as I mentioned, you'll be maintaining an EEO plan. This is something that folks from my office will be able to walk you through. And there's some key components to that plan. You see them referenced here on the screen. We don't need to go into detail because it probably won't apply. But should it apply, there's folks within my office who specialize in this area, and they'll be able to walk you through kind of pulling together the pieces of that plan, submitting it back to us, and demonstrating your compliance with those requirements in that area. So now we're going to switch into two program areas that definitely will apply to you no matter what. If you receive funds or vehicles through this program, if you partner with MassDOT through this program, and you provide services through this program, these requirements, these civil rights requirements will definitely apply to you. And that's in two program areas, Title VI and the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. What I want you to, let's see. So the kind of top level perspective that we're talking about here, not contracting, not employment, but your actual public facing operations, the kind of public transit activities that you're making available to the public, whether it's existing customers, trying to solicit new customers. This public facing side of your operation is what we're talking about here, maintaining a non-discriminatory method of administration of your actual operation. So with Title VI, we're talking about Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You actually see the letter of the law up on the screen. Just a couple of things I wanted to tease out from the verbiage there. You'll see that everybody's covered by Title VI. There's no threshold requirement. There's no residency requirement. There's no citizenship requirement. There's no minimum threshold other than being a person in the United States and you're trying to access those services that you're providing. Anybody who meets that designation would be covered by Title VI, and as a recipient of federal funds, you'd be expected to operate those services in a way that don't discriminate against those individuals trying to access your services. You also see this direct connection to federal financial assistance in the law. That's how this Title VI obligation kind of reaches organizations like yours. You might have heard the terms already. We've been saying that MassDOT is a direct recipient of federal dollars from FTA, and then we pass through those funds to subrecipient organizations like yours through grant programs like this and other mechanisms. The law is set up to make those dollars that we're funneling through the kind of mechanism that brings these obligations with it. Some of the other civil rights areas function differently, so I just wanted to point that out here. And you do see in the original letter of the law from 1964 these references to the three protected categories from 1964, race, color, and national origin. The reason I mention that is I'm sure all of us in the room today can think of additional legal protections against discrimination in additional categories. And you're absolutely right. Whether you're thinking about religion or veteran status or disability or age or gender, whatever, you're all absolutely right. There's been subsequent federal and state legal developments since 1964 that have identified those additional protected categories. We kind of treat them all as part of Title VI. So when we're talking about Title VI, we're talking about this kind of umbrella of this public-facing non-discrimination obligation. But from a compliance perspective, it's important to note that the original obligation kind of started with race, color, and national origin. I already mentioned the mechanism here for this direct recipient, subrecipient relationship that this federal program kind of creates between our organizations. And what you see here is, this is an example of the kind of content that MassDOT maintains in its own Title VI programs. We are required to demonstrate to our federal partners that we have the ability to meet these Title VI public non-discrimination requirements. We do that through developing Title VI programs. We actually have a separate Title VI program for each division within MassDOT because there's different requirements that our federal partners have established. And some of it you can see is very kind of nuts and bolts. We're signing documents, we're posting notices. Some of it is a little bit more nuanced or subjective. We're trying to do inclusive public engagement. We're trying to break down barriers to access, whether it's a language barrier or a physical barrier, what have you. That all becomes part of our kind of Title VI compliance profile. The reason I wanted to put this list up here is we've been working on these issues for a long time. We have a well-established program across each of our divisions, and FTA's recommendation to all of you as grant applicants or grant recipients, hopefully eventually, is to simply adopt your primary recipient's Title VI program, make it your own. We've gone through the effort to develop all the core components. They're all available to you. You'll see through the grant award process that we actually have kind of a plug-and-play checklist approach to literally downloading components of our program, inserting the name of your organization into it, submitting that back to us to demonstrate that you've adopted it, and we know that you have a compliant Title VI program on the books, ready for anybody to review, whether it's MassDOT or FTA or anybody else that's interested. We certainly acknowledge that the capacity for any of your organizations to really take a deep dive around these kind of non-discrimination issues, especially if this is new to you, that you might not all be working with the same kind of capacity, the same kind of resources to take as full or complete dive on any of these issues. So we definitely try to focus on kind of key compliance strategies. You'll see that through the compliance program, whether it's the desk audit or the site visit. You'll certainly see that through the kind of core pieces of the Title VI program that we want to make sure you have on file. So some of those key components are signing the asserts and assurances, notifying customers, beneficiaries of their rights, of their protections under the law here, engaging in inclusive outreach as you're advertising your program, as you're operating your program, and of course maintaining accurate records of these kinds of compliance activities so you can report back to us so we can all be comfortable that these obligations are being met. And there's actually a couple of ways in which Title VI itself features in the application process. And I wanted to highlight these because it may not be kind of clear on its face that that's what's happening. And again, this is one of those moments to kind of think about your operations through this civil rights lens, as opposed to just thinking about the kind of non-civil rights related aspects to the work that you're doing. So first and foremost, the FTA certifications and assurances, you'll see this referenced in the application. It's a document developed and maintained by FTA that we expect all of you to download and read and acknowledge as part of your application process. You'll actually, I believe, be signing it and resubmitting it back to us with the signature of your executive director, your board, or the appropriate signing authority. And even though it covers a lot of kind of federal legal requirement areas that are even non-civil rights related, there's a section in there dedicated exclusively to these non-discrimination obligations under federal law. So by acknowledging it, by signing off on it, you're really taking this proactive step to say, yes, we understand that these obligations are a part of our operation now as new recipients under this program, or sub-recipients under this program, and we're going to take proactive steps to meet those obligations. The second one is questions around the demographics of your service area. And again, we didn't want anybody to have to feel like they have to, go and hunt for data that they might not be familiar with. They might not have worked with this kind of demographic data in the past. So we didn't want to create, a hurdle to applying for anybody. So we created a tool that's part of the application process. It's a spreadsheet that you download, and you indicate your service area by town. It could be a single town, it could be a grouping of towns. Simply indicate what town or towns you operate in, and the spreadsheet will automatically give you these demographic values across two demographic categories: minority status and low income status. Those are two categories that FTA specifically calls out as part of our compliance activities to demonstrate how federal funding, FTA funding, is being distributed across those two population demographics. So this is our opportunity to get a sense of the kind of population of the service area that the federal funds or federal assets that you'd be using, kind of what the reach would be across those populations in your service area. And then of course, if you're being proactive as a subrecipient and you're really thinking ahead around Title VI, you could say, okay, if I know that I have a large minority population in my service area, a large low-income population in my service area, there might be correlations between these demographics and limited English proficiency, something like that. You can make that part of your proactive outreach about the service that you're providing. You can say, we know that we have a large LEP, limited English proficient population, based on the fact that we did this demographic dive, so we know that the materials that we're going to be putting together might need to be bilingual, or we might need to bring an interpreter to a meeting where we're announcing our new service, things like that. So you can, again, take the administration of your program and think about it from the civil rights perspective and be proactive on it. Switching now to ADA. Really what I want to, again, we're talking about the kind of public-facing aspects of the ADA. There's, of course, internal aspects of the ADA in terms of how you operate as an organization, but we're really focusing here on the public service that you're providing. And as my colleagues mentioned, so much of what we're talking about with ADA compliance from FTA's perspective in a program like this is the kind of technical compliance of assets and of the program. Are you operating accessible vehicles? Are you maintaining the accessible features of those vehicles in a confirmed operable condition, whether it's the cycling of lifts and the maintenance regime and all of that? So I don't want to take too much of a dive around that kind of technical compliance side of it. What I do want to do is, we've already covered that, simply mention that the ADA requirements in this area are much more holistic than just the kind of functionality of the asset. The ADA really envisions inclusivity across, again, the broad spectrum of the way that you're connecting with the public. So for you to be acknowledging these ADA obligations and being, again, proactive in meeting them, we'd be looking at something like, are you aware of the accessible communications requirement under the ADA? Right, this could be as simple as, all your organizations probably maintain a website, you probably all have information about your services on that website. Well, we have federal assisted programs that are trying to improve transit options for individuals with disabilities, and you're advertising those services on your website. But do we know if those websites are accessible to individuals who are using assistive technology to access that information? Things like that. So being able to understand that we're not just talking about the physical vehicles, we're also talking about the way the service is being provided. Really shows that you have kind of a full picture of the ADA obligation in this area. And again, we can take a deeper dive as issues come up there. And we've been over that. So some civil rights specific resources here. You saw a couple embedded earlier on in the presentation around DBE and EEO requirements. We also have some here about Title VI and ADA requirements. My contact information will be available at the end of the presentation, so you can certainly reach out to me with any questions. I'm happy to take any questions now if there are any. Otherwise, thank you.
All right. Great. So we're just going to take about a 5 or 10 minute break now, and then we're going to go and take a deep dive into the application forms. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be getting into the online application process now. and this part of the training, we're going to kind of cover there's two things that you're going to need to kind of know about when you're filling out the application. One of them is how to create the application and download the forms in our grants management system, which is the first thing we're going to go through, and how to fill it out and submit it. And then we're going to go into the forms themselves and kind of go through each question and show you what kind of things we're looking for in there. So the first part is going to be the online application process, and that's going to be covered in this guide that we included. So Black Hat is our grants management system that we will be housing the application in, and this application creation and submission guide will go through all the things I'm talking about now. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go through it, and I won't go into too much detail because this guide is really helpful for when you're actually sitting down and you're opening up the application. You can follow it step by step. So I'm just going to kind of touch on them briefly now, and then after we cover that, we'll get into the going through the individual forms. So as I mentioned, the application is housed in Grants Plus, which is MassDOT's implementation of the Black Hat grants management system. Black Hat is a system that's run by Panther International, which is a company that has partnered with about half of the state DOTs in the country now to help them manage their grants. So they've been really helpful for us to be able to not just have the grant applications and things for this program, but for other programs and for all the projects that we run with the regional transit authorities. So you do need a login for Black Hat. If you have never used the system before, or if you have but you can't remember your username or password, just reach out to me and I can create a username for you or help you remember a password. So when you do log into Black Hat, this is for once the application period is open and you log into Black Hat, you'll see the applications tab there, and when you click down there on new opportunities, you should see there where you can fill out the application. When you start a new application, you have to select which of the project types it will be, so either replacement capital, new capital, operating, or mobility management. There's no limit to how many different applications you can fill out if you want to apply for lots of different projects. When you have selected which type of project it'll be, you can click the apply button, and then that will create your application, and then now whenever you go into the system, you should see the application you created under the existing application section, and you can go in there to work on it, and it'll tell you what type of application it is and whether or not it's been submitted already. So when you go into that application you've created, it's going to look like this. There's going to be a section where you can download each of the application forms, which we'll be going through in more detail in a few minutes. And then there's a section for once you've completed the forms, and then there's a couple of other things that you have to do before you can submit that we'll go through. But I guess most importantly, the way that the forms, the way that you'll actually complete the application is by clicking download, and then the forms will come up like this on your computer. They are fillable PDF forms, so you can save them on your computer, you can work on them, you can edit and do everything that you need, and then you don't really have to go back into the system until after you've finalized everything and you're ready to submit. So most of the work you're probably going to be doing offline. and you can fill it in on your computer and save it there, or if you're more comfortable writing by hand, you can print out the application forms, fill them out by hand, and then resubmit them. So yeah, it's really important, be sure to save the forms somewhere on your computer and save your progress, because if you don't, then you'll lose it. So like I said, the bulk of the work is going to be offline while you're filling out those forms. We're going to go into that part of it in a second, but skipping over all of that, once you've filled out the forms and you're ready to submit them, as I mentioned, you'll go back into the system onto the page where you downloaded the forms. Over on the right, there's a section to attach the completed forms. It'll give you a little window like this where you can choose the file on your computer. You can upload it there. You can click the view button once it's been uploaded to see the file that was uploaded and make sure that everything uploaded correctly and everything is filled out. And so that's going to be the main thing for filling out this application, is downloading and submitting the forms. But there's a couple of other little things that you're going to need to do in Grants Plus before you can click that submit button. And one of them is to create a project or a need and attach it to your application. Now this is something that people have had a lot of trouble with in the past, so I'm going to go through the process really quickly, but if you actually just email me with the name of your project, how much money you're applying for, and a brief description, I can just do all of these steps for you, and it really is confusing, and I wish there was a better way in the system to do it, but I'm going to go through it really quickly. But like I said, don't pay too much attention because I can just do all this for you really quickly. The way that you add a project is you go into the project tab on Grants Plus, click add new. It'll give you a UPIN, which is a unique ID that will be attached to your project that will help us keep track of where it is in the system. Our system has a few thousand projects in it because we also have not only the projects that are for competitive programs like this, but also all of the regional transit authorities, capital and operating projects. So it's really important that you have this unique identifier. So that'll auto-generate when the project is created, and you'll just need to fill out a name and a description. This is actually incorrect. The year's going to be 2020. We forgot to update that part. And then it'll ask you to fill out a description. It'll ask you to input the different funds that you're applying for. And so this is all the stuff that, again, either you can try to do this on your own, or if you email me, I can do all this for you. But basically, when you're creating a project, you have to select what type of project it is in the Federal Transit Administration's definition. And the way that you do that is by clicking lookup, and then it'll give you every single type of project that can be funded with Federal Transit Administration funds. So there's a few hundred there, and it can be really confusing. If you do want to do this on your own, these are the common codes for replacement vehicles, expansion vehicles, operating assistance, so you have to select the code. Buy replacement van is the most common one. And then once you have input the code and filled out all the project information, it'll give you this project summary page. And then, even though you already filled out here what the total estimated cost is, it'll ask you to put in this funding request where you'll have to break down the federal and state, or the federal and the local split, so the 80-20 or the 50-50, or the state and local, and input those requests individually. So when you click on that, you have to select which type of funding it is and the amount. You have to make sure that the total project cost adds up to the total cost of the vehicles you're applying for, or how much money you're applying for operating funds. You have to make sure the split's correct. And then after you've done all that, you have to attach the project to your application. So you go back into the Applications tab, you click Add in the Project section. You should see the project that you created come up. You click the checkbox and you click Attach Projects. Yeah, so that is creating a project and attaching it. Again, a lot of steps. I can do it for you. Just email me and I can help you with it. So when you're going to submit and you have uploaded all of your completed forms and you have attached the project to the application, the last step will be to attach any additional documents that are required, and the list of additional documents is included when the first form that you'll download on that application page is this CTGP application checklist. And this isn't something that you have to submit back to us. This is just something for you to keep track, to make sure that you're filling out all the proper forms, that you have everything on hand. And in the lower section, it'll tell you all the things that you need to attach based on whether you're a new applicant, what type of organization you are. It'll go into that. So just be sure to refer to the checklist and make sure that you have all of the attachments uploaded that you need. And when you're in the application tab, you actually won't see the submit button appear until all of the required forms have been uploaded, the project has been attached, and the additional documents have been attached. So if you're if you're trying to submit the application and you're not seeing the button, it just means that something's missing. And if you need help figuring out what that is, then you can always just reach out to me and I can help you get everything that you need. So that is the process of applying in our grants management system. So again, that is covered all in this Black Hat application creation and submission guide. Now we're going to go into the application forms themselves and go through each one and just kind of take a look at the things we're asking for in there. And that is going to be covered in this thicker guide, the application form completion guide. So this is something that we put together that goes through every single question on every single form, and it just kind of gives more detail on the background of what we're looking for. And so that's going to always be the first place that you want to look when you, if you have a question as you're filling out the forms, you'll want to look in there to see if it's answered. And then if you can't find the answer in there, then you can always just reach out to me. But going into the forms themselves, as I mentioned, there are 4 distinct applications for the 4 different project types: replacement capital, new capital, operating, and mobility management. So there are 10 potential forms required for completion in Grants Plus. You won't have to fill out all 10 unless you're submitting all 4 applications for all 4 project types. The number of forms that you have to complete varies depending on what type of organization you are and the type of project you're applying for. So again, just refer to the checklist to make sure that you're getting everything that you need. again, the forms are in a fillable PDF format. They can be completed, saved, and submitted in any Adobe program. Or if you're not able to fill them out on your computer, you can always print them out, fill them out by hand. None of the form fields are deemed mandatory, so it's not like when you go to submit them and the submit button won't appear unless you filled everything out. In the actual forms themselves, there's nothing that's deemed mandatory, so it's on you to review them before you submit them and just make sure that you filled out everything that needs to be filled out. Just some kind of quick overview things when you're going through these forms. I just want to make a distinction between if it asks you a question about your transportation program versus the project. So this is mostly like when it's asking for budget information, it'll ask for your transportation program budget. And that's the budget for any kind of transportation service that your organization provides. So if you are a council on aging and you have a transportation program that you run, we just want to see the budget for that program. We don't need to see your entire organization budget. We don't need to see the entire town budget, just for the transportation service that you operate. But if it's asking for the project budget, then that's the budget just for the specific thing that you're applying for. All of the forms have the allowed number of characters noted for each question. So it'll just encourage you to be concise in your answers. If you have a large service area, it's helpful for us to, if you want to attach a map of your service area to see all the towns that you serve. On the project-specific forms, at the top of each of those, it'll ask you for the Grants Plus number. That's the number that's auto-generated when you create that project. So if you want to create the project in Grants Plus first, it'll give you that number and you can put it on the top of all the forms. Or if you want to save that until the end, then you can fill everything out and then leave that number for last. You can do it either way. It just has to both get done before you're ready to submit. And when it asks you to fill out a funding request, only insert the total project cost. So either the total cost of the vehicles that you'll be applying for, or the total cost of your operating or mobility management project, and then it'll autofill the 80-20 or the 50-50 split. And just be sure that anything that you fill out in the application forms matches the project description in Grants Plus, because it's confusing. Sometimes we've gotten applications that have a different number than the project in Grants Plus, and we're not sure which one we should go off of. So so if you're filling out multiple applications for different projects, you do have to open up different multiple applications, but the good news is that 3 of the 4 or 5 different forms for each application are the same no matter what type of application you're filling out. So those forms you only need to fill out once, and then you'll just have to fill out the project-specific forms for the different project types. So it's actually a great segue going into those forms now. If you want to follow along, it's this first bundle of forms that starts with CTGP program and project eligibility. So these are the forms that you'll have to fill out no matter what type of application you're submitting. But again, if you're submitting multiple applications, you only need to fill these out once, and then you can just upload the same documents for each different type of application. So the first form that you'll have to fill out is this program and project eligibility, and this is mostly just yes or no questions to help us determine that your project type and your organization are eligible. Before you go into the rest of the forms, it'll just ask you to certify what type of organization eligibility category you fall into. It'll ask you to certify that you are meeting a need identified in a coordinated human service transportation plan. So there are, I believe, 15 plans that each cover different areas of the state. It has a link at the bottom of the form to where you can view those plans and see which area you fall into. You'll either be named, your organization might be named in that plan as a provider or service, or you might see a need that's identified in that plan that your project will be meeting. So it'll just ask you to identify which plan you're included under and which page number it is. If you have any trouble finding that, these plans are written very broadly, so you should be able to find a need that you're going to be meeting in the plan. But if you have any trouble with that, you can always just reach out to me and I can help you. And this is a federal requirement that we have to certify this. Continuing on the eligibility forms, it'll just ask some yes or no questions to help us certify that your accounting systems can manage federal grant funding. If you're a nonprofit or for-profit and you have a recent audit available, it would be helpful for us if you attach that so we can review it. And if you are a returning organization and you've had a compliance review with Trevor, it'll ask for the status of how that review went, and if you're a new organization, obviously you don't have to worry about that. The next form, which should be stapled in with these other forms, is the organization profile. This will be required for all organizations except for RTAs because we work very closely with them and we have a good idea on their background. But this is important because this profile is not applicable for everyone. It's going to show when you're going to submit the forms, it's going to show as optional with this blue check mark, and the green check marks are all the required uploads. But again, that form is only optional if you're a regional transit authority. Everyone else does have to fill out that form, so don't let that blue check mark fool you. You will have to fill this one out if you are not an RPA. Basically what the profile does is just request some pertinent information about the background of your organization, what your service area is, what type of service you operate, the kind of different, what the trip types you typically have that you offer, like whether they're medical trips or to social day trips and things like that. It'll ask for how many vehicles you operate, how much staff you have. And this is all just to help us get a better idea of the background of your organization and how well your transportation program runs. Again, when it asks for the transportation program budget, we want the overall budget, not just for the specific project. If you don't have dollar amounts for any of these sections, you can just leave them blank. On the last page of the organization profile, it'll have this training and safety program section where it'll just ask yes or no if you provide any of these types of trainings to your drivers. We don't expect you to have done all of these or even most of them. We're just trying to get a better idea of how we can offer technical assistance to you for these trainings, because we do offer free driver trainings through the MARTAP program, the Massachusetts Rural Transportation Assistance Program. So again, if you have lots of no's on this training section, don't worry about it. It's just to help us kind of figure out how much training we need to provide. I believe that does it for the organization profile. So if you flip the page, you'll see the civil rights form, and that's the last of the 3 forms that you'll need to fill out no matter what. This kind of just goes into the sections that Greg talked about, just making sure that your organization is doing what you need to do to comply with civil rights requirements, if you've received formal civil rights complaints, how you dealt with those, if you have a Title VI plan on file, or if you meet the EEO or the DD thresholds, so you have those plans on file. If you don't have a Title VI plan on file, that's okay. You have to have one once you are a subrecipient of MassDOT, so if you don't have one now, then after the award has been made, Greg will work with you to get one on file, but again, you don't have to worry about that now if you don't have one yet. So that is the civil rights form. Really quick, under the Title VI section, that's where Greg talked about the tool that helps you determine your minority and low income population. There's a place in Grants Plus where you can download that, and then it'll open as an Excel file on your computer, and you just select the towns that you serve, and it'll give you those numbers for the minority and the low income population. But if you're having trouble using that tool, again, always just reach out to me and I can help you. So now we're going to get into the project-specific forms. So you should have each of those in your folder separated out by which type of project it is. So you'll see replacement capital, new capital, mobility management. But we're just going to start by looking at the operating project requests. So this, again, you'll just input the total cost of the project you're planning, and it'll split the 50-50 funding split for you. It'll just ask for, again, the budget information for your project, what the project intent is, the type of service, the service area, how many people you're expecting to serve, what type of trips are you expecting to provide. Again, any budget information, just put a 0 in any non-applicable fields. And if there are any, there's under section 4, it'll ask for performance measurement data. That's only if it's an existing project. Obviously, if you're a new project, you won't have any performance data yet, so you can just leave that section blank. And just be sure for the in-kind or the different match sources in the project budget, you identify specifically where those are coming from. And then, each of the project requests will also have this coordination and collaboration form and the need and project benefit form, but we'll go through those at the end because those are the same for each type of project. But looking at the mobility management request form next, there are basically two general types of mobility management project: staffing, salaries, costs, and everything else, which can include planning, IT, design, consulting. So it'll just ask you to select one or the other at the top there. Again, be sure to include actual planned budget figures when you fill out the project budgets. And similar to the operating project request, it'll just ask you specifics about the project, what type of population you're hoping to serve. The questions for the mobility management are a little more open-ended because, as I mentioned before, this is kind of the umbrella project request type. There's a lot of different things that can fall under here. The third type of project-specific form is the replacement capital request. This is what probably 70% or more of you will be filling out. This is the most common form. The the form that you see when the application opens next week will be slightly different because right now we've just included what types of vehicles were available for the last 5 years, but by next week we'll have the updated list with what will be available this round, and we'll also have the vehicle guide available that will show you the types of vehicles that will be available, their specs, the cost for each one, so you can figure out which types of vehicles you want to apply for. It'll ask you to identify whether you are applying for federal or state funds. If you are an RTA, you can apply for both, but everyone else, you should choose either one or the other. Typically we try to award state funds to smaller organizations and award the federal to the larger organizations that are more easily able to handle the federal funds, but it mostly just comes down to how much is available each year and how many applications we get. So what you enter here might not be final, whether it's federal or state, so you don't have to worry too much about that. But just make sure that the amount that you're requesting is the correct amount and base it off of the vehicle costs that are going to be included in the guide. It'll ask you for this replacement one, you will have to identify the vehicles that you'll be replacing, and you'll be including an active fleet inventory form, which we'll get into at the end, but just make sure that where it asks you to list the last 4 of the VINs that you're replacing here, that all of the vehicles that you list here are also listed in the full fleet inventory form. It'll ask you if the vehicles that you're applying for have not met their useful life yet, then there's a section for you where you can provide information about why you need to replace the vehicle early, like maybe it has some excessive maintenance costs or it was 11, and so you're replacing it before the useful life requirements have been met, and that's all going to be included. There's a section where you can include that information. If you're an RTA applying for a vehicle on behalf of the COA, please call it out in the lease section of the application, and include any lease agreement documentation, and upload that as an attachment when you go to submit. Yeah, the extenuating circumstances, that's where you can identify any reasons that you are filling out the application for this vehicle before it's met the useful life. The new capital request is the 4th and final project-specific form. Very similar to the replacement capital request, except that obviously you don't have to include the VINs that you're replacing because these are going to be expansion or new vehicles. But because of that aspect of it, there are some additional questions for the new capital request that will ask you to clearly identify the project need and how the new service will enhance your existing transportation coordination service goals, and why you're trying to expand your fleet rather than just replacing vehicles that you already operate. So as I mentioned, attached with each of these project-specific forms is one is what we call the coordination and collaboration form. The full title is Coordination of Transportation Services and Collaboration with Other Organizations. So this is where, again, it's mostly just yes/no questions, asking if you work with like planning organizations in your area, if you're involved in regional activities with your metropolitan planning organizations, your regional coordinating councils, things like that. Again, we don't expect you to perform or utilize all of these different types of partnerships, but we do want to ask the question here, and it will help your score if you can show that there's collaboration happening. And the last form is the demonstration of need and project benefit. It seems kind of backwards to have that as the last one because that seems to be the first thing that you'll need to figure out. But again, this is just a federal requirement. You have to be, your project has to be meeting a clearly identified need in your service area. So they'll just ask you what that need is, how you identified it, and then just the demonstration of project benefit, it'll just ask you to talk about the target number of individuals that your project will serve, and the client and the trip types. The last form, this is just for vehicle requests, and we didn't print it out because it's just an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't print very well, but if you're applying for, that should say all vehicle applicants. If you're applying for replace or renew vehicles, the form, it will just ask you to fill out this form that should be completed in Excel. It'll just ask you to list out all of the vehicles that you operate for your paratransit service. It'll ask you for the age and the mileage on each of those vehicles. It'll ask you for what the condition of those vehicles is. Because it's in Excel, you can add or delete as many rows as you need. This should be not just MassDOT funded vehicles, but any vehicles that you operate. And this is a distinction that's mostly important for RTAs. We only need to see your light duty vehicles, so your vans and minibuses. We don't need the fleet inventory that includes all of your full-size buses that you use for regular fixed route service. So the form, when you include all of your vehicles, it'll help calculate the average age, mileage, and condition, and it'll also help you calculate your spare ratio, which is just the number of vehicles that you keep in reserve versus how many you typically use in a given day. And again, in addition to the forms here that you fill out, there are a number of attachments that you'll need to include. The types differ based on what type of organization and application you are, application you're submitting. Just be sure to look at the checklist and upload those in the additional documents section. And contact us if you have any questions. So wrapping up, just a couple of final notes. Be sure to read the guidelines, read those forms and guides that we gave you, and that'll help you determine that your project and organization are eligible. Be sure to answer the specific questions asked in a concise and comprehensive manner. If you want to up your coordination score, be sure to seek out your regional coordinating council. If you just Google Regional Coordinating Councils Massachusetts, it'll give you the contacts for your area, and that'll just help you check that box that you've reached out. Be sure to seek technical assistance from MassDOT, which means seeking technical assistance from me well before the grant submission deadline, because it's going to be really hard in that last week or so. You know, the application is open for 4 weeks. I really encourage you to try to get as much work as you can get done in the first couple weeks, because things get a little crazy towards the end, and we can consider late applications. So this is the contact info for me and also for Trevor and Greg. And also be sure to get your Grants Plus login information as soon as possible if you haven't already by reaching out to me, because all of the resources that we provided here, as well as other additional resources, are available electronically in the resources tab on Grants Plus. And I believe that's it. So thank you all for coming.